This is the story of unquestioning love. Love that does not demand a happy ending, and can thus be the only true declaration of love. Love for a city which more than any other symbolizes the power of love. Verona, the city of Romeo and Juliet. No one here would ever wish to put asunder that which the great English playwright William Shakespeare brought together. For Verona in northern Italy depends far too much on the memory of the most famous lovers in literary history. There is no world without Verona's walls, but purgatory, torture, hell itself. Hence banished is banished from the world. Even though the town could scarcely find a better marketing slogan than that quote from his play, it is far more likely that Shakespeare intended his Romeo to say that Verona's particular appeal stems from the lovely Juliet. England's greatest literary figure never visited Italy, yet all the other poets and philosophers who ever set eyes on Verona were in full agreement that here they truly had found heaven on earth. Yet this heaven on earth was established with such diabolical brutality that by comparison the feud between the Capulets and the Montagues seems almost like a harmless fairy tale. The reality was far worse than any tragedy, and it was linked to the name Della Scala. The coat of arms of the Della Scala family, the name means of the ladder, seemed to anticipate its inexorable rise in the 13th and 14th centuries. And with Christian names like Cangrande, Big Dog, and Mastino, Bloodhound, the Della Scalas seemed predestined to terrorize their subjects. Nearly all the leading members of the murderous dynasty lie in a kind of private cemetery in the center of Verona. Cangrande I was buried in a richly decorated sarcophagus. He also sits high above it in the form of a monumental rider, wearing a broad grin. A mocking greeting for his enemies, or the witty idea of an imaginative sculptor. Historians cannot agree. Agreement only prevails on the exceptionally high quality of the splendid burial monuments and their symbolic importance. Because like most Italian despots, the Scaligeri, as they were also known, were generous patrons. And in Dante Alighieri, they even managed to tie Italy's greatest literary figure to their court. As if deep in thought, the poet gazes over the Piazza Signori, the town hall square, towards the palaces of his patrons. After the Della Scala had granted him asylum in 1316, he showed his gratitude in the form of effusive eulogies. Dante took a critical view, however, of the suspicious and mistrustful mood amongst the citizens of Verona, referring, inter alia, to the Capulet and Montague families. However, there was no mention yet of Romeo or Juliet. More than 250 years were to pass before an Italian writer told the tale of the tragic lovers. And further versions appeared before William Shakespeare took up the theme. Whenever a Juliet is seen in Verona today, stereotyped ideas are relativized. In the eyes of the Veronese, Juliet has always been blonde, her fair hair symbolizing a supernatural, luminous figure. Every year, hundreds of thousands of visitors make their way to Juliet's house in the Via Capello. The walls are plastered with declarations of love, and often the street is a solid mass of people, all of whom have dreamt of standing on, or at least under, Juliet's balcony. Where is my Romeo is a question that is rarely heard. His family home, only a few streets away, draws few visitors. It's said that the Montagues were enemies of the Scaligeri and thus belonged to those who finally emerged triumphant. In 1356, Cangrande II, who was also known as the Rabid Dog, entrenched himself behind the walls of the Castel Vecchio. To protect himself from his subjects, he had the sombre fortress built in just 2 years. But on a trip into town, he was murdered by his brothers, who seized power and extended the fortress through the addition of a private bridge. Inherent in every form of tyranny is the seed of its own doom. And after a whole series of other family murders, the inexorable decline of the Della Scala began. By the year 1387, their downfall was finally sealed, and no wall or bridge could have prevented it. In declaring the city part of the world's cultural heritage, UNESCO said, Verona represents in an exceptional way the concept of the fortified town at several seminal stages of European history. Besides the Scaligeri, the fortifications were extended mainly by the Venetians. Examples of bombastic military architecture, the city gates were complemented by such light and fanciful buildings as the Palazzo Maffei. The splendid Baroque palace with the Venetian lion in front of it, and an earlier Renaissance masterpiece, the Loggia del Consiglio, are expressions of the cheerful and lively mood that prevailed. The advent of Venetian rule in the early 15th century marked the start of a long and peaceful period in the history of Verona. The loggia formed a bright contrast to the stolid and sometimes sombre Romanesque features of the neighbouring Scaligeri buildings, but this had hardly any impact on the medieval townscape. In a succession of palaces, the city extends out from the town hall square to the market square, the Piazza delle Erbe. In the 12th and 13th centuries, this was the centre of the Republic of Verona. The Piazza delle Erbe is indisputably one of the most beautiful market squares in Italy. When a new day dawns on the square and the first stalls open behind the Gothic Colonna del Mercato, the market column, it's a reminder of the time when the name of the piazza, erbe, Italian for herbs, still had an obvious significance. That's because in those days only vegetables were sold here. In the Republic's heyday, however, this was also the place where the Grand Council assembled. And the unusually long shape of the piazza is a classical legacy, because beneath the cobblestones lie the remains of a Forum Romanum. In some places in the city, the ancient flagstones of the Roman roads have been laid bare. The Romans left behind a whole number of important monuments, like the Arco dei Gavi triumphal arch, the oldest bridge in Verona, and the city's most famous hallmark, the arena, which dates back to the 1st century AD. In summer, the gigantic amphitheatre is turned into an open-air opera house. As the evening performance draws near, a delightful air of excitement can be felt. Opposite the arena, on the Liston, the traditional boulevard in Verona, opera goers enjoy a stylish meal before hurrying across to see the performance. Verdi's Aida, a traditional work, receives a tremendous ovation. Like a fleeting gust of wind, the applause quietly drifts across to the Piazza Bra. Verdi's opulent operatic dramas have found a fitting stage in the arena, as has the literary drama in the silence of Verona's churches. Juliet is said to have been laid to rest in this crypt in a Capuchin monastery, but the sarcophagus is empty. Where did the tragic death scene take place? It could have been in any of the city's churches. Even though it might sound blasphemous, Verona's churches seem cut out to be stage sets for Shakespeare's tragedy. This applies just as much to San Zeno as it does to San Anastasia. San Anastasia is the biggest church in Verona. From 1290 onwards, it also became the main church in the center of the city. The interior is a huge three-nave basilica with high arcade arches resting on 6 pairs of massive columns. It reveals the rich contrast in the use of construction materials that is so typical of Verona. The pattern of the floor slabs corresponds harmoniously with the shades of the columns and arcades, and with the richly ornamental decoration of the ceiling vault. Characteristic of this masterpiece of Italian Gothic architecture are the extensive interior walls, which offer plenty of space for panel paintings, reliefs and frescoes. Located above one of the pointed arches is the city's most famous work of art. It shows St. George setting out to fight the dragon. Created by Antonio Pisano, better known as Pisanello, the fresco marks the climax and the end of courtly Gothic art. Gothic power and Romanesque splendor. The fanciful lightness of the Renaissance. Verona offers it all and much more. The seemingly so confusing and sometimes almost overwhelming medley of different styles was the decisive criterion for Verona being declared part of the world's cultural heritage. The city has grown so freely and harmoniously that even hackneyed architectural elements do not obtrude. Hardly any visitor to Verona knows that originally Juliet's legendary balcony wasn't a balcony at all, but a Romanesque architectural element which was only added in the 1930s. So, was Shakespeare's drama just a fairy tale? Did Juliet never really exist? Irrespective of the historical truth, Verona has become the city of Romeo and Juliet, and thus the city of eternal and unquestioning love. A legend has evolved which deserves to be believed. And that is why only here will we find Shakespeare's heaven on earth.